I found 10 war movies that are all based on real missions, rescues, and disasters. Some of these are so intense the real-life survivors say the movies toned it down. Let's start with a pilot whose capture would have changed the whole war. 1972, Vietnam. An EB-66 plane gets shot down during the Easter offensive, and the man inside becomes the most important target in the war. Not because he's high-ranking, but because Lieutenant Colonel Isel Hambleton knows things that absolutely cannot fall into enemy hands. The kind that if the North Vietnamese get him, it's a catastrophe. Gene Hackman plays Hambleton in the film, and Danny Glover plays the airman trying to coordinate his rescue from above. The movie shows Hambleton surviving 11 days behind enemy lines with Air Force pilots doing everything they can to keep him alive while he's trapped down there. The real rescue was insane. They used coded Gulf references to communicate with him because they couldn't risk the enemy figuring out what they were saying. They dropped supplies, mounted extraction attempt after extraction attempt, and every single try put more American lives on the line. By the time they finally got Hambleton out, several Americans had been killed in the effort. The actual rescue came down to U.S. Navy SEAL Thomas Norris and a South Vietnamese commando named Nguyen Van Keet, who both received the highest military honors for pulling it off. The 1st Special Service Force was this elite joint unit in World War II, Americans and Canadians working together as commandos. William Holden plays Colonel Frederick, who gets put in charge of this mixed group, and the first half of the movie is all culture clashes and bar fights and discipline problems. Very Dirty Dozen energy. That part's Hollywood. In reality, these weren't convicts or troublemakers, they were volunteers. But there were real differences between how the Americans and Canadians operated, so the tension wasn't completely made up. The second half goes into their actual missions. The force's assault on Santa Maria, and then the big one, their climb up Monte la Defensa in Italy. This part is true. The Devil's Brigade really did scale a sheer cliff face, catch the Germans completely off guard at the top, and succeed where much bigger units had failed. It was one of those operations that shouldn't have worked, but did. The movie came out right after The Dirty Dozen, so critics just saw it as another knockoff. The producer later said their timing killed them at the box office. But it's a well-paced, entertaining war film, even if it's not always accurate. Burma, 1944. The 5307th Composite Unit, America's long-range raiders, are trekking through absolute jungle hell to take a Japanese-held town. This was the unit that helped inspire the modern Army Rangers, and their story is brutal. Samuel Fuller directed it, and Fuller was a combat vet himself, so he knew what he was showing. Jeff Chandler plays Brigadier General Frank Merrill leading his men through mud, disease, and enemy fire. Soldiers collapse from hunger. Tropical diseases tear through the unit. They're fighting the jungle as much as they're fighting the Japanese. The characters are composites and the story compresses several battles into one narrative, but the core of what happened is there. Jeff Chandler died right after they finished filming, so Fuller couldn't go back and shoot anything else he might have needed. Even with studio constraints and an incomplete production, the movie delivers. It's a tough story about a unit that deserves way more recognition than it gets, and Fuller made sure their ordeal came through on screen. Combat Outpost Keating in Afghanistan was built in possibly the worst location imaginable for a military base. They put it down in a valley completely surrounded by high ground. Anyone with basic tactical knowledge could tell you that's a death trap waiting to happen. On October 3rd, 2,900 of Taliban fighters hit the base from every direction at once. The outpost dedicates 40 minutes to this battle sequence, and it doesn't let up. No cuts to other storylines, no breaks in the action. Just the horror of being trapped in an indefensible position while trying to survive. 8 Americans died in that fight. The movie shows their names and faces at the end, along with the fact that Keating was later evacuated and completely demolished. The film's based on Jake Tapper's nonfiction book, and the production went to serious lengths to get it right. In 2018, Lieutenant Colonel Stoney Portis, who was actually there during the battle, flew to Bulgaria on his own dime to visit the set. He brought another veteran from the fight, Chris Cordova. When they walked onto the replica of the Outpost, Portis looked over at Cordova and saw tears streaming down his face. The set looked exactly like the real thing on the day of the battle. Right after 9/11, the first U.S. Special Forces team into Afghanistan was a dozen Green Berets from Operational Detachment Alpha 595. October 2001, they partnered with the Northern Alliance to take the city of Mazar-e-Sharif from the Taliban. Here's the part that sounds completely made up but isn't. They did it on horseback. 21st century special operations conducted on horses, combining cavalry charges with calling in airstrikes. They were outnumbered 5,000 to 1, so they had to rely on speed, surprise, and just making it up as they went along. Chris Hemsworth plays Captain Mitch Nelson, who's based on the real Mark Nutch. A lot of what happens in the movie comes directly from first-hand accounts of the mission. These guys took Mazar-e-Sharif in 3 weeks, and all 12 of them made it home. They're known as the Horse Soldiers now, and there's a statue of them at Ground Zero. The story comes from the book Horse Soldiers, which finally made this mission public almost a decade after it happened. Most people had no idea this even occurred. A Special Forces team riding horses into battle while coordinating air support from F-18. January 1879, Rorke's Drift in South Africa. 150 British soldiers faced 4,000 Zulu warriors. The movie stars Stanley Baker and a young Michael Caine in one of his first major roles. The British had just gotten destroyed at the Battle of Isandlwana earlier that day. Now the Zulu army was coming for this mission station defended by engineers and infantry. For 2 days, those 150 men held out. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded for that defense, the most ever given for a single battle. What makes Zulu interesting is that it doesn't just turn this into a story about brave British soldiers holding off savage attackers. The film shows the Zulus as warriors with equal courage and tactical skill. It became the 4th most popular film in Britain in 1964 and launched Michael Caine's career. But here's what's telling about how powerful the film was. The South African government banned it for black audiences. They were terrified it would inspire resistance by showing Zulu warriors as brave, intelligent, and nearly victorious against a colonial power. 60 years later, it's still considered one of the best historical war films ever made. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry was the Union's first all-black regiment in the Civil War. Glory tells their story. Matthew Broderick plays Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, who leads them with Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, and Andre Braugher as soldiers in the unit. The film shows the formation of the regiment, the training, and their final assault on Fort Wagner in July 1863. That battle was a Confederate victory. Most of the 54th were killed or wounded, but their courage in that fight changed public opinion across the North and brought thousands more black soldiers into the war. The filmmakers built the story from letters, military records, and first-hand accounts, including Shaw's own correspondence. Some characters are fictional, but every battle came from real events. Director Edward Zwick worked closely with historians to get the details right, everything from the uniforms to the battle tactics. Glory won 3 Oscars, including Best Supporting Actor for Denzel Washington. It's got a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, and critics still call it one of the best war movies ever made. January 1945. Philippines. Over 500 American prisoners are being held at a Japanese camp in Cabanatuan, and the U.S. Army Rangers are planning a rescue mission behind enemy lines. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci and Captain Robert Prince lead the operation alongside Filipino guerrillas. The film follows the whole thing, the planning, the infiltration, and the raid itself. It's based on actual histories, including a book called Ghost Soldiers, and they brought in real veterans as consultants. Captain Prince himself watched the film and said it depicted the raid accurately. The production went all out on authenticity. They used real World War II equipment and vintage C-47 aircraft. Hampton Sides, who wrote Ghost Soldiers, visited the set and noted how painstaking the attention to detail was. The real pity here is that the film got caught up in studio politics and sat on a shelf for 3 years. When it finally came out, it made $10 million against a $60 million budget. Massive box office bomb. Still, historians and military reviewers call it one of the most accurate World War II rescue movies ever made. It just never found an audience. 2006, Afghanistan. A British patrol from the 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment is out on a mission when they wander into an old Soviet minefield. One soldier steps on a mine. When the others try to help him, more mines go off. Now the entire section is trapped. They're standing in a field full of explosives, waiting for rescue helicopters while trying to keep their wounded friends alive without triggering more blasts. The whole film plays out in real time. There's no CGI and no music score, just silence and tension and the sound of soldiers trying not to move wrong. It feels less like a movie and more like a documentary. Director Paul Caddis thought audiences hated it at the test screening because everyone left in complete silence. Turns out they were just stunned by what they'd seen. The film earned a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, higher than Dunkirk. But it never went wide in theaters, and the total box office barely hit $34,000. Nobody saw it. Back in 1980 in London, 6 militants took over the Iranian embassy and held 26 hostages. What followed is a 6-day standoff that the entire world watched on live television. The film tracks 3 separate threads. Police negotiator Max Vernon is trying to keep things from exploding. The Special Forces unit led by Rusty Furman is preparing for an assault if negotiations fail. And BBC journalist Kate Adie is covering the whole thing live as it unfolds. The movie doesn't go for spectacle or Hollywood drama, it just sticks to the facts and the mood. The shifting demands, the government refusing to negotiate, the pressure building with each day. Everything in the film comes from the historical record. The production had access to the actual embassy building, and former Special Forces members, including Rusty Furman himself, worked as consultants to make sure the tactical details were right. Every beat of the crisis, from the press coverage to the assault planning, is based on what actually happened.